You know, one thing that was definitely different about this weekend's big day of protest against Trump is that this time the protests got a lot of mainstream media coverage. I don't know if the protests a couple of weeks ago were like a surprise to the headline writers and newsrooms of America's major news outlets, but for whatever reason, a couple of weeks ago, that huge day of protest was really kind of played down or just underplayed somehow in the mainstream press. That definitely turned around for the protest this weekend. Headline, New York Times, shame. Protesters nationwide rally again to condemn Trump policies. Thousands of demonstrators rallied at hundreds of events on Saturday to speak out against the president's handling of immigration, civil liberties, job cuts, and many other issues. The Times front-page protest photos and protest signs like these ones, for sale, democracy, and resist, if not now, when, and arrest the kidnappers. Headline, Washington Post, 50-51 protests rally small towns and big cities against Trump policies. Protesters gathered in hundreds of rallies across the country to denounce President Donald Trump. The Washington Post and its coverage front-paged a big crowd in Washington, D.C. at the Washington Monument, including this sign front and center, innocent until proven guilty. Headline, the Associated Press, anti-Trump protesters rally in New York, Washington, and elsewhere across the country. Elsewhere is doing a lot of work in that headline, given how many protests there were. But the AP front page, this big banner outside the White House fence, Trump must go now. Next to a sign that says free Kilmar, for Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Headline, USA Today, nationwide hands-off 50-51 protests against Trump continue for second weekend. They front-paged this upside-down American flag in the foreground, hanging, of course, in a way to signify distress. And then you can see the signs there, no king, and impeach, remove, imprison. Headline, CNN, protesters denounce Trump administration in nationwide rallies while supporting impacted communities. Here's the Boston Globe. No kings. Anti-Trump demonstrations around Boston invoke American Revolution. Here's the BBC. Thousands join anti-Trump protests across U.S. Front paging. This is a good sign. I've only ever seen this once. Don't piratize Social Security. That's very well done. Here's The Guardian, which is also based in Britain. Protesters filled the streets in cities across the U.S. to denounce Trump agenda. Here's Reuters, the news service. Thousands of protesters rally against Trump across the United States. Here's Bloomberg. Anti-Trump protesters turn out from New York City to San Francisco, and may I suggest, everywhere in between. Here's CBS News. Anti-Trump rallies held across the U.S. to protest administration's policies. Here's NPR. Protesters unite against Trump in hundreds of rallies across the U.S. No more tariffs on the sign there. Here's the LA Times. Anti-Trump protesters rally again in cities across the country. Impeach and remove being spelled out in bodies on the beach on the front page of the LA Times. This was the lead story on NBC Nightly News on Saturday night. You see the chyron there at the bottom, massive anti-Trump protests across the country.
Tonight, protests across the country, from Denver to midtown Manhattan, to right outside the White House, people voicing anger at the Trump administration, including over its recent immigration actions.
I don't know if the mainstream media catching up now to what's been going on in the streets, I don't know if it's a big advance for that movement against Trump or not. But it's at least worth noting that it is starting to happen. It really hadn't been happening before, and it is now. The coverage is now there. That said, judging from the literally hundreds of protest videos and images that we reviewed over the weekend and compiled, my sense is that the momentum is here, and these protests are going to keep happening basically everywhere, regardless of the level of coverage they get, even though they are now getting more coverage. These are hard to put together, but we've done it. Okay, from left to right and then top to bottom, what you're looking at here is, ready? Anti-Trump protests this weekend in Chicago, Minneapolis, Anchorage. There was a whole bunch of protests in Alaska this weekend. We'll talk about that in a second, but that's Anchorage, third from the left in the middle there on the top row. Then Jacksonville, Florida, Buffalo, New York, Atlanta, Philly, Portland, Oregon, Little Rock, Arkansas, Omaha, of course, New York City, massive crowds in New York City, Denver, Houston, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Ohio, Salt Lake City, Boise, Idaho, Hartford, Connecticut, and then the last two there are Indianapolis and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I paused there on Anchorage because they really did have a very big crowd in Anchorage this weekend. Thousands of people turned out in Anchorage. And you see some of the signs there are quite good. Due process is a right, not a privilege. There's the big one there up on the right that just says, nope. This is a very good one, actually. It's the only time I've seen this exact phrasing. Only caring about your own rights is exactly how you lose them. That's very good. Orange sign just to the right of that. Nixon and McCarthy weren't this bad. I agree. You may also see another one on the left there that's specific to where this is. Dan and Nick stand up for the rule of law. That's about Republican Senator Dan Sullivan and Republican Congressman Nick Begich, both of whom have been very pro-Trump, even as Alaska's other Republican representative in Congress, Senator Lisa Murkowski, has mildly criticized him. But Dan and Nick, hey, stand up. And I just want to say, for whatever reason, it wasn't just the big turnout they got in Anchorage. There were a ton of protests all over Alaska at this time. Gustavus, Alaska, population 600-something. That's a significant portion of the town. There's only 600 people in the town. Soldotna, Alaska, all along the Maine drag there, people outside the AutoZone. Bethel, Alaska. It was really cold and rainy, but people turned out in Bethel, Alaska. Look at the turnout in Fairbanks, Alaska. Fairbanks had tons of people turn out this weekend. At Nome, Alaska, N-O-M-E, Nome, protesters posted up there again at the marker for the end of the Iditarod sled dog race. You see the sign there, stop disappearing people. A lot of signs along those lines. In protests we saw everywhere all over the country. Kodiak, Alaska, another good turnout there. Lots of American flags. United we stand, divided we fall. Beautiful Kodiak, Alaska. This was Homer, Alaska. Homer Head Start, 32 years. Keep it going. As Trump says, of course, he wants to eliminate the entire Head Start program everywhere in the country. Literally, I mean, was there a single town in Alaska that didn't protest this weekend? I watched local news reports in Alaska. There were protests on Saturday, all simultaneously in Juneau, Seward, Wasilla, Anchorage, Gustavus, Soldotna, Bethel, Fairbanks, Nome, Kodiak, Homer. I might have even missed some. Oh, Petersburg, Alaska as well. Petersburg, super cute. They call it Little Norway. They turned out to protest in Petersburg, Alaska against Trump this weekend. Hey, Elon, Mars beckons. And that's just a snapshot of one state. That's just Alaska. That was kind of on fuego this weekend. But, you know, if you want to generalize, I think, about how the protests against Trump are evolving now that we're 90 whatever days in, I would say that the media is now covering these protests more and more. And I think that's part because there's a lot of them and they're big. I think it's also maybe because the media is realizing that Trump is only getting less and less popular with each passing day in each new poll. This protest movement to the media, I think, seems like a tangible way to see and describe and report on that. In terms of other changes and evolutions in the anti-Trump movement, I would say for this weekend in particular, one other change we saw is that in a lot of places, people added food drives and clothing drives and other really practical efforts to build donations for food pantries and other local resources that have been hit so hard by Trump's cuts. And those food drives happened alongside the marches and rallies, which is really constructive. I would also say in general that we are, if you want a generalized perception of what's going on in terms of how this movement is changing, I would say we're seeing more protests in red states and in Republican areas of blue or purple states. I mean, that's my impression from looking at all the footage that I have looked at from this weekend's events. Here's some more. Here's Amarillo, Texas this weekend. Here's the big turnout they got in Atlanta, Georgia this weekend. Tons of people turned out in Atlanta. Really big turnout in Boise, Idaho. Boise again and again and again has been turning out huge numbers of people in Idaho. Here's Carson City, Nevada. Look how many people turned out in Carson City, including outside the state legislature building there. Carson City, of course, the capital. Thousands of people turned out to protest in Chicago once again. Chicago definitely showing up. Here's Clarksburg, West Virginia. outside the Harrison County Courthouse. Here's Cincinnati on the left side of your screen. Here's Columbus on the right side of your screen. Ohio has been turning out a lot of anti-Trump protests throughout this past 90 days. This weekend was no exception in Ohio. Here's Michigan. Here's Detroit on the left side of your screen and Grand Rapids on the right side of your screen. Michigan, like Ohio, has been turning out lots and lots of Trump protests with big crowds. This was Saturday in Detroit and in Grand Rapids. There was big crowd protesting in Denver this weekend, yet again. Denver, Colorado. Also, Fargo, North Dakota turned up this weekend. People along the main drag there in Fargo. Concord, Massachusetts, they celebrated the 250th anniversary on Saturday of the first battle of the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. The anti-tyranny, no kings theme dovetailed very well between the commemoration of the American Revolution and the many people who turned out there to protest against Trump at the same time. Let's do a few more of these. This is left to right, top to bottom. That's Huntersville, North Carolina. Really big, impressive turnout in Los Angeles. Morgantown, West Virginia, where they have been hit very hard by Trump destroying federal offices and agencies. Lower left, that's Mobile, Alabama. Lower center, that's New Haven, Connecticut. And lower right there, that's Raleigh, North Carolina. They had a really big turnout in Raleigh. Look at that crowd. Here's another group. Upper left, that's West Caldwell, New Jersey. Upper center, that's Portland, Maine. On the right, on the top, that's Newton, New Jersey. Lower left, that's Westmont, Illinois. Mesa, Arizona in the center on the bottom there. And beautiful Livingston, Montana on the lower right. We saw big protests this weekend in Greenville, South Carolina, and in Springfield, Ohio, which you will remember. That's where Donald Trump and J.D. Vance attacked Haitian immigrants in perverse terms. Lots of protesters out in San Diego, California. New Orleans, people turned out in the French Quarter to protest. We say no to deportations, protect immigrant rights. Sacramento, California, a big turnout in their Trump protest this weekend. Norwalk, Connecticut. Surprise, Arizona. Topeka, Kansas. Here's just a couple more. Look at the big crowd in Topeka. This was Rock Hill, South Carolina. The Easter Bunny says, hop away from fascism. No more rotten eggs in the White House. Here's a look at St. Paul, Minnesota, where they turned out just a look at this, very, very large crowd of people to protest against Trump this weekend. Again, in St. Paul. They keep doing this. And I could go on and on and on for a very long time with this. The first 50-51 protests, and again, 50-51 stands for 50 protests in 50 states on one day. The first one that they held was in February. It was mostly at state capitals. They actually had more than 50 protests that day, but less than 100. Now, in April, in the same month, we had one day with over 1,000 simultaneous protests, another one this weekend with over 900 simultaneous protests. I mean, some of these protests this week, this month, we've seen tens of thousands of people, a few that topped 100,000 people. Sounds like the next one of these is not going to be on a Saturday. It's going to be on May Day, on Thursday, May 1st. We shall see. But again, I think in general, what we are seeing is that more of the media is figuring out that this is quite a thing. This is not business as usual. This is quite a thing that is happening over and over again at state capitals and on overpasses and on town squares and on street corners and in all sorts of unexpected places, including the reddest of red states. My sense is that as Trump's poll numbers continue to drop, not only are the protests going to grow and spread, but they're going to get more and more attention as well as the dominant news narrative in the country becomes not just what it has been, which is the failures and mistakes and scandals of the administration, the damage Trump is doing. But I think the dominant narrative in the country is becoming not just that disastrous behavior by Trump, but also the country saying no to him and resisting him more and more and more all the time. And that's not just a vibe or a feeling. That is a granular thing that is happening. With these protests that we are seeing all over the frickin' country over and over and over again,